For folks who are just joining, we're going to get started in a few minutes. Thank you. Hello. Hi, Laurie. Hi, Sadie.
Hello. Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Hello, everyone. And we have up, and there's Cyndi. Look at this. Everyone's here. I'm thinking that I should have put 5 minutes in between each panel, but thank you all so much. We've got a number of people who have joined from session to session. This is, of course, our last session of day one. So thank you all so much for being here. And for those of you who are just joining, this is your first session you're joining of the day. My name is Lily Stairs, and I am the founder and CEO of the Chronic Boss Collective. This is our first summit, and we are so excited to have all of you here. Today's panel is going to be a great one with Laurie, Sadie, and Cyndi talking about experiences in the corporate world and living with a chronic condition. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get going. This will be available after we are recording all of the sessions. This session will be available on the Circle platform, which is where you've signed up, and how you accessed this event. It will be available until October 7th, at which point summit session recordings will only be available to members. We do encourage you to think about joining the Chronic Boss Collective for our final cohort of the year. This is the last time that you can join and say that you were first, a member in our first year. And you do get $50 off as a registrant of the summit. You should have received a discount code that will go to you, that has gone to your email. And again, membership will be open until October 7th. I would also like to say a very, very big thank you to Laurie, our moderator today, for sponsoring, and Clear to Flourish for sponsoring our summit and making it possible. We couldn't do this without our sponsors. So thank you for your support and for being such a fabulous member of the collective. And with that, I am going to pass it over to you to moderate the panel. I am working on getting, I think chat should be set up for folks to chat. So if you have chat that you want to share with the panelists, please drop that in the chat. If you have more of a logistical question, something about membership or about tech, please drop that in the Q&A and we will take care of it. You may be telling me chat is currently disabled. Thank you so much for letting us know. I'm going to work on getting chat enabled, and that will happen shortly, but I'm going to let Laurie, Sadie, and Cyndi take it away. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lily. It's so wonderful to be here. Certainly Sadie and Cyndi, but then everybody who's been participating in the sessions. I have been to both sessions so far today, and I have loved them. If you haven't been part of everything today, Lily did a fantastic session with building blocks that really have shaped her career. And then last session was a wonderful one on stress. And I know in my own health journey, managing and understanding stress has been a critical component of that. So this is going to be shifting gears a little bit. We are going to be having a panel discussion. And what I love about the format of what we are going to do is that it really is all about sharing stories, sharing experiences. And I can't think of anything better when it comes to life in general, but then certainly life when we're living with chronic conditions. I know when I first got diagnosed, I felt very alone. I felt, even though I had a wonderful support system, they didn't fully understand what I was going through. And I can honestly say, being part of the Chronic Boss Collective, they get it. I have other people that get it, that understand me, they get what we are facing every day. So I am grateful every day for that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sadie Gauthier and Cyndi DeLira. And ladies, I would love to have you both have just a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves. So Sadie, why don't we start with you, and then Cyndi, after that, we'll move over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Laurie, and thanks, Lily, for having us here. Hi, everybody, to both chronic bosses that are members and to people who are new. Hi, my name is Sadie Gauthier. So a little bit about me in terms of the chronic side. When I was about 6, I was diagnosed with pandas. Since then, it's been once you have one autoimmune disease, you tend to have a few more. So I have more rare ones too. I have functional neurological disorder, some type of mast cell activation, idiopathic hypersomnia, and hyper alpha tryptosemia. And along with that, so when I had pandas at 6, it actually caused some neurodivergent and mental health traits, which I always
Mhm.
find interesting. It's more organic than some other stories. So I have ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, depression, anxiety, OCD, and motor tics. So I kind of am a collector of the chronic. But in terms of my work life, I went to school for mathematics in Massachusetts, where I'm based. From there, I was recruited to work for the government. So I worked in the public sector for 5 years as a crypt analyst. So I worked as a code breaker for the Department of Defense. Absolutely loved my job. But due to health issues and the constrictions of the government, I ended up having to leave. Um, and I ended up at my current company. It is also a cybersecurity company, but we focus more on training. I've loved it here. I've been here about 3 years. I work with them to do initiatives like neurodiversity and cybersecurity. So we do a summit on that. So I've really found a place where not only I have that flexibility to work my best, but I can also give back to the community. So hopefully some of the things that I've experienced can maybe help someone here at this conference moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quickly, Sadie, although this is not a title that we would ever wish, I love how you coined the phrase, a chronic conditions collector. And when I go back to, my opening in terms of what I've found in terms of the Chronic Boss Collective, people that get it. You are the epitome of that, right? In terms of your lived not only career journey, but also your health journeys. And I hope that people are able to walk away with that from our session today, right? The that shared experience and other people who get it. You have so much, not only from a health perspective, but also from a career perspective that we can all benefit and learn from. So thank you, Sadie. And Cyndi, I would love to have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Cyndi. Thank you, Lily, for having us here. I'm a founding member of the Chronic Boss Collective. And honestly, I was really excited. It was just like an ad where the algorithm was doing its thing. And last year I sort of saw it and I thought, wow, great. This is a community that I definitely can relate to. So a little background about me. I was diagnosed with an incurable cancer, multiple myeloma, when I was 22. I was also a young mom, so my daughter was 4 at the time. And I was juggling multiple things. I was in school to be a dental hygienist. I was working. And I think that's sort of where my journey began. I had to navigate the healthcare system as a young minority woman, which was something new to me. I had to navigate motherhood, single motherhood with a chronic condition. I had to navigate just like general life duties. So I'm here 30 or 10 years later. Thankfully, the cancer has not shown any sign of coming back, but I get regular checkups. Aside from that, I have ADHD, and I think I have some PTSD. That is a difficult one sometimes. And I just consider myself a neurodivergent individual. So I've been that way. I was diagnosed later in my life, which I think I've known many people to have that revelation later on where you just sort of realize, great, I got the diagnosis and a lot of things make sense now. I was not weird or crazy. I just thought differently.
Mm,
So I'm here because I went to school to be a dental hygienist, and obviously during the pandemic, that was not a very in-demand career. I also was an interior designer, and that also was not very in demand. And so I used the skills that I had to pivot into the tech industry, where I now work for a legal software company, as shown here, celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And now I found a position, a role that actually 5 years ago, if you would have asked me, I had no idea what hybrid or remote work was, what the ability to do that was, sort of the benefits, the fact that I'd still be able to work a job, but be able to have the flexibility of being a parent and then being able to navigate multiple doctor's appointments. And so that's sort of what brought me here. And I'm excited to share some tips for you all as well about navigating sort of a corporate career.
So wonderful. I'm so excited to dive in. So just really quickly, let me introduce myself. It's really interesting. So today we have the corporate career panel. Tomorrow, as part of the summit, we have the entrepreneur career panel. I actually kind of straddle both of them. I was diagnosed with my autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, while I was in the corporate world and needed to navigate that. I come from the corporate world of 25 years in the learning and development and employee engagement, employee experience place. So really everything that was focused on making our company a great place to work. And about 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and I, through, a lot of different channels, taking a medical leave, really trying to figure out how to focus on my career and health, I made the decision to actually leave the corporate world and start my own business, which is something that I actually credit to my diagnosis and to my autoimmune disease. I say that it's a blessing that my diagnosis gave it to me. I think I am absolutely where I am meant to be right now. And I often say that my autoimmune diagnosis gave me the courage to actually step away, reprioritize my life, and do something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time. And ironically enough, it is the year birthday this week of me stepping away from the corporate world into entrepreneurship. And just a really quick story. I know, you both mentioned sort of your pathway into the chronic boss. Part of what the work that I do is around well-being and using the science of positive psychology to help people lead flourishing lives. And that includes people with chronic conditions and without chronic conditions. So I work with both populations. And what my path to the chronic boss was, I saw an article at the end of last year that Lily had written. And I can't remember, I think it was in Forbes. And I remember feeling like, oh my goodness, this is where I need to be as part of the chronic boss. And it gave me such confirmation for bringing my lived experience of my health journey with positive psychology to other people living with chronic conditions. So that's kind of how I made my way to the CBC. So great introductions. You know who you're talking to, you know who you're listening to. So let's dive in, ladies. And I think the first question that I'd love to hear from both of you, and Cyndi, we'll start with you on this one. Climbing the corporate ladder comes with its own challenges when you are not facing a chronic condition or multiple chronic conditions. But certainly when you add a chronic condition or more, it can really complicate the journey. So I would love to hear from both of you. How have you been? And then also, how are you still navigating those challenges? And how are they currently still shaping your career?
That is a great question. Thanks, Laurie. So for me personally, I think it took a lot of introspection. So I sort of had to understand my diagnosis a little more, just to be able to articulate it to those that I'm working with. And I think it's something I'm still working through, especially with the ADHD. It's something that I try to tell others. It's like a blessing and a curse. I can do so many different things, but at the same time, I can have sort of that decision paralysis where a very small task can seem very daunting. And so sometimes when I'm working with others and they're like, I don't understand, this could take you like it takes me 10 minutes. I have to sort of stop and say, it takes you 10 minutes, but like my brain starts to think of all the different possibilities of how this can go wrong. I start to question things that I probably shouldn't. And so I think that was difficult for me. I grew up in a household where sort of any sort of different abilities were not embraced. It was sort of like, don't talk about it, just do what you have to do to fix it, and then keep pushing through that. And so it was difficult for me from the beginning, especially in a professional career, to be able to verbalize that to superiors, because I had just sort of always been told, like, figure it out, like find the way around it. But what I think I do is I look at my weaknesses, and that's something that I choose to focus on. So, for example, I am very uncomfortable with one-on-one interactions, but I put myself consistently in the position to have those, whether it's through networking events here in my city, whether it's me showing up to another event at work, to try to push through that fear. And on the flip side of that, I also think it sort of gives me more visibility, and I use the platform that I have to speak on these things because I need people to understand that this is not a very small amount of the population. I think each of us deals with something differently. And just like any chronic condition, there are flare-ups, right? So like sometimes you go through points in your life where there's a flare-up of negativity, and that could affect your own physical well-being, even if you can't relate to having a physical chronic condition. And so I sort of use that as a template when I'm explaining this to my coworkers or other people, sort of like, you have a bad flare up in life. And that's sort of what happens to me, except it just physically changes the way that I do things. So one thing that I know that I have to do is organization. I seek out classes on how to get myself organized because it can be a lot to juggle between having a career, being a parent, also having this condition in which I have to manage things myself. And I'll be the first to say, I think I've definitely struggled to keep up with doctor's appointments because sometimes they can stack up on each other. And that's hard, especially when you know what you're going to hear at the appointment. And sometimes you're just not in the mindset to be like, I want to show up today and hear this is wrong or that this is, something's going on. And so for me, it's really just sort of been learning more as I go and trying to be as communicative as I can without overwhelming people or trying to make them think that I'm trying to get them to understand why I'm late on something or why I can't show up to the office this day or things of that nature. And, just like everything, it'll have its pushbacks, but it's sort of just really staying true to yourself. And I know that if I'm being honest to myself, then I don't regret anything that I say, and sometimes it's not taken the way that it should be, but that's not on me. And once again, I just do my part to show up, talk to people, and bring awareness because I realize it is an uncomfortable and sometimes difficult conversation to have, especially in a corporate workplace where you're always sort of expected to bring your best self. And sometimes that's 50%, sometimes it's 150%, but I think it's realizing that it's not always that consistent.
Oh gosh, there's so much there's just so much there that you touched on. Really getting to know yourself and understanding, who you are, how you might be evolving, how you might be shifting, and continuous learning. I love that. I feel like I know for myself, there's been continuous learning, not only from, my area of expertise and my job and my profession, but also continuous learning about my own health journey, right? So there's a lot of learning that happens, and then using your voice to raise awareness. I want to dig into that a little bit more a little bit later, but I think that's a really important one. Lily talked about it earlier in her session around owning your narrative. And so I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. So thank you so much, Cyndi. So Sadie, how about you? How have you how have you managed these challenges?
Yes, I mean, I definitely echo everything that Cyndi has said. I think that the first thing to do is, as a chronic patient, we are constantly dealing with strategy plans for when we flare up, right? We always know
Mhm.
these are the things that I need during a flare up, and these are the things that I need to do to get through it. So make that contingency plan for work. A lot of us limit that to our home life, but make sure you have a contingency plan for your work, whether that means making sure that you have someone that you feel comfortable with as a coworker, being able to take on some of your workload sometimes and reciprocating that in return when you feel good. Just making sure that you have a plan, because when you show up with a plan, it makes you seem to your superiors like you know what you're doing and you have a handle on it, even if you may not, right? We have everything going on, but as long as you seem calm and
Yeah.
collected, people will be calm and collected. And another thing I will say is definitely how you present the information in the business world is important. As chronic conditioned people, we want everybody to understand us. I think we go through a lot and we have a lot of empathy for those who do. But not everyone has that experience or knowledge. So I think reminding yourself of that and saying they might not understand what we're discussing, right? So I
Mhm.
always feed into accommodation, requests or conversations like that with my best foot forward. So I say, this is all the work that I've been doing, and I've been getting really great evals, and you're telling me that I'm doing really good work. This is happening in spite of not having X accommodation. So imagine if I had this accommodation, how much more work and how much higher quality work would get done. That way they
Yeah.
see it as more as an efficiency thing, and less as oh, this person is a liability. It's they want to do their job. So I know people get nervous about disclosing, and again, it's owning your story is correct. You have the power to share or not share whatever you want to, but just know that when you do own it with confidence and calm, because that will keep you confident and calm in moments of crisis at work.
Yeah, and I think when you do choose to own the narrative, and I'm gonna say own the narrative regardless of how much you share out or not, right? And I think that's a key, there's a key element in there, right? And because there's a lot around the stories that we tell ourselves, as well as what we speak externally to others. And I think when we are able to own the narrative, and Sadie, you mentioned this, owning it with confidence and helping people see and understand and raise awareness, but not just see it as a liability, but this is, these are the benefits that can come from it as well, because there are a lot of huge benefits. And ladies, I'm going to actually, I'm not going to do this throughout, always, but I do want to go to a question that came in because I think that it connects really well to what we're talking about. And folks, we're going to have time at the end for Q&A, but Megan shares, I struggle a lot with fearing that people think I'm using my chronic illness as an excuse for things, having to have different work hours, needing to be remote more often. Any suggestions on either how to frame your needs to employers or how to manage that guilt and fear? I'm going to start off and then I'm going to open it up to either or both of you. Megan, I would encourage you to think about whether that fear is true, whether that fear is accurate. And again, I think that goes back to what I was just saying. It's the stories that not only we share and the narrative that we share with others, but the narrative that we share with ourselves. And what I try to think about is everybody has different limitations, right? It's not just chronic conditions. We all come to work with many things going on in our lives, right? And I think that the more that we can not make up stories that may or may not be true and own the narrative around, okay, people can think what they want, but the more I'm able to raise awareness, raise understanding, educate people, and have confidence that this is what I need to be most successful, I feel like you're going to be setting yourself up for even more success from the very start. Cyndi, Sadie, anything to add to that? Yeah, Sadie.
100%. I think, excuse me, I think that having a group like the Chronic Boss is something to leverage. So if you're uncomfortable with how something is going to come off, or how to phrase things, do it with somebody that understands what you're going through and has been in the corporate world, and practice it. The more that you
Mhm.
practice, and the more that you're going to believe that, yes, I'm bringing a lot to the table and these are my accommodations that I need and I deserve them. So having a group, having a network, wherever you fit in, but talking to people who get it, and having the space to ask questions, right? When you did this, do you have any stories? You're going to hear stories that are positive and negative from all kinds of people, but collecting those, experiences and then saying, okay, these are the things that I'm prepared to go in. So I know that if X were to happen, I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Maybe I won't emote. The more knowledge that you have, the better. And again, practice, practice, practice. I was not this confident back then. Back in my government days, I was confident in my ability to work. I was not confident in my ability to stand up for my chronic illness.
Mhm. I love
The
that.
time that I left, that was when I stood up for myself.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I loved my job, but I chose myself. And so it takes a lot of time. So definitely, Megan, don't worry about the fact that you don't have that confidence right now and you're worried. be worried, allow yourself to be worried. It's natural, like you said, Lori, but also
Mhm.
practice it, because we've all been worried, we've all been nervous about it, and we are
Yeah.
surviving right now. And some of us are thriving. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, so much goodness there. The practice, right? And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, being around people who get it, who get you, who can be that sounding board of, oh, how does this sound when I say it in this way? Love that. Cyndi, what would you like to add?
I echo all of that as well. I think the other thing I was thinking of is many companies now have employee resource groups or community resource groups. And I think
Mhm.
those, just like Sadie was talking to, you can leverage them as a resource. In regards to the feelings though, I think that's something that I had a revelation, not in this company, but in a previous role that I had, where you have to sort of ask yourself. So like sometimes those fears come because there are managers that push back, or there are things that you hear where people are like, I think this is happening and it's not, it's not fair, or it's whatever. And I did have a role where I had a lot of pushback, and I had to sort of ask myself at this point in time, I can't be scared to speak up for myself. And if I do, is that a place that I want to be employed at? Really? Like, do I want to be in that uncomfortable environment? And I think that's just something else to think of. Like, if you consistently have that feeling, and if maybe it's brought to you by the environment, to question that, and to begin to think like maybe this is the step out. I always try to think like the universe makes me uncomfortable when it's time for me to move on, especially when I tend to get comfortable. And that was something that I did experience, where when I would voice, hey, and this was when I was working in dental, so it was very physical, and it took like a large toll on my body. It's like sometimes I couldn't do those 12-hour days. Sometimes I could not do 6 days in a row, Monday through Saturday, and work school holidays. And it was like, well, this is what the business needs. This is what the business needs. And that's when I realized there are other roles that will accommodate me. And so maybe this just isn't the best fit for me. And so I think once again, having that conversation with yourself and that introspection and thinking, have I leveraged every resource that I have? Because sometimes I feel like we stay in places just because we think we have it like really good, but it's sort of like you can have it even better somewhere else.
Absolutely. And that goes back to something that Sadie ended her last bit on, that, you can even be thriving. And I think sometimes we forget that we have choices, right? And that's not saying that everybody needs to go and find something different, but it's one avenue, it's one choice. And then the last thing, I'm gonna just give you one tip and tool. Megan's last part of the question is how to manage that guilt and fear of negative perceptions. One tool that I love to use is what if. So often we think about what if from a negative perspective. Okay, what if they think I'm making up excuses? What if they think that I'm lazy? What if they don't believe me that I have a chronic illness? What if X, Y, and Z? And what I like to encourage people to do is shift the what ifs to the positive. What if they are so accepting of my requests? What if other people on the team were afraid to ask and I'm able to, be a voice for others? What if it all works out, much better than I ever thought? So shifting from that negative to positive what if can be a tool. Sadie, I think I see in your mind that you have one more thought. Am I right?
yeah, just one last thought, because we did mention about climbing the corporate ladder. Again, like we kind of discussed, choosing your assets and looking at some of your negatives as positives and providing those in light can lead to you moving up the chain, right? So talking about your neurodivergent qualities, as some people call them, superpowers, right? So rephrasing,
Mhm.
bringing those to the forefront instead of hiding them behind the corners. And the other thing is, maybe this is your chance to get involved in your company. I mean, I got involved in my company, so I work for the SANS Institute. They just started when I joined their neurodiversity and cybersecurity summit. So I knew I was neurodivergent. I knew that there are people out here too. I knew that, there were some things that need to be talked about. So I got involved, and my bosses noticed, right? Because when you're investing into your company, your bosses notice. So you could also make it a positive, right? So that advocacy can also help you climb the corporate ladder as well. So it can be seen as a positive.
Absolutely. And I think so often we feel, again, so alone. We're the only ones that are feeling X, Y, and Z. We're the only ones that have a chronic condition. We're the only one that is neurodivergent or has anxiety, whatever it might be. But that is absolutely never going to be the case. And that's where I think, both of you mentioned this, and I know I did too, like the power of using your voice. So great discussion. Let's shift gears a little bit. And I'd love to hear both of your experiences in terms of, and I know both of you mentioned your career paths, right? Where you started, where you are now, some of those shifts. And I'm curious about whether you have had to change your definition of what success means, what it looks like as, as the years have unfolded, as chronic conditions have unfolded. So who would like to go first?
I could go.
Cyndi, you're off mute. It's all
Yeah.
yours.
I could go. So I think for me, especially being diagnosed so young, I realized success for me was just getting it done for myself, in every aspect. When
Mhm.
I first tried to get my diagnosis for cancer, I actually had a lot of doctors look at me like, you're crazy. There's no way that's a possibility. And I think that's where my self-advocacy journey really began, because I knew something was wrong. I knew that I needed to get a little bit more testing. And so I did. I went to several nearby hospitals. My cancer was in my tonsil. So I was chronically diagnosed with tonsillitis, sinusitis, steroids, antibiotics, that sort of thing. It wasn't until I had an ENT, because my tonsils had grown so large, that I asked for the biopsy. And they had sort of, like, okay, I'll give you the biopsy because that's what you'd like. Nothing was indicative that there was cancer there, but I just kept researching, and being a dental hygienist, I had so much knowledge on head and neck anatomy. And so I just knew something was wrong. Once I got that diagnosis, the next step was like the treatment plan. And I actually had a very specialized form of radiation called proton radiation to help spare some of my natural, or to help spare some of the healthy organs that I had here. So that way normal radiation goes in one side of your body, out the other. The proton radiation was actually able to just stop at wherever the cancer source was. So being so young, this was important for me to advocate. I had to navigate insurance companies. Once again, I was a mom, so my daughter had just started preschool. And so getting through all of that, being able to lock down the treatment plan, I had realized that there were several instances in my life where I just sort of looked to the authority and thought, okay, great, you have the answer. I will trust everything that you say. And after that experience, I just knew that I had to question everything moving forward. So even within the corporate career, I had a role where actually when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was let go. And part of me knew that was incorrect, but I didn't have the knowledge I needed. And so I on my own was able to work with the EEOC to rectify the situation. And thankfully I was able to follow it through, to see it through and get everything done. But I knew then through that entire journey, and I mean, that was over the span of maybe 6 years, including being diagnosed, going through treatment, figuring out what my options were, doing the investigation, looking at everything that had been done. And so for me, it was really like success is when I get the end result that I want, and making sure that I follow it every step of the way. And I see that that's true in everything that I do, whether it's the diagnosis, whether it's at work. If there's something that I'm looking for, I have to see it through and figure out how that works for me. So you may see someone and they're like, I did this and I did that. I don't have a bachelor's degree, so I know that I have to work a little bit harder to prove that, but it's like using those strengths that I have and being able to pull those into the conversation and really take control of whatever the path is that I'd like to take. Being in a corporate career, I actually work on the nonprofit side. It's completely volunteer, but I help run a nonprofit because I believe so strongly in my career in tech. I just realized how much more accessible it could be for other individuals. Whether you have a physical disability or whether it's an invisible disability, just being in this industry has shown me so many other pathways that I wasn't able to see. And so being able to speak to others to what that success is to me, right? Being in this role, landing in an industry in which I had no idea, I'm sure it didn't exist 25 years ago. But being able to have this opportunity and share it with others on how I got here is really important to me. And so I think that in itself is a success, and getting over the fact that I was constantly told not to talk about the things that are supposed to keep you down. And now I use those sort of as the crux of my stories to say, like you said, this sort of helped me. It aided me. If I had not had this chronic illness, I don't think I would have known these abilities that I have.
Exactly. And yeah, oh, and that just gave me goosebumps because, it's all about, there's such a huge component of mindset in that, right? And Cyndi, you mentioned a couple of times that the way that you were brought up in terms of, we're not going to talk about this, there's no need to talk about this, and how that has shifted and how that has, redefined what success looks like. Success years ago might have looked like, all right, well, I'm going to just power through and not talk about it because that's what I've been told to do. Whereas now that looks and feels very different. And that's a beautiful thing that many can benefit from. Sadie, how about you?
Yes. So mine's a little bit, I think more analytic. So when I worked for the government, it was my dream job. When someone asked me, where do you see yourself in 20 years? I wanted to be the 80-year-old in the back of the room talking about fax machines. Like that's the level of love that I have for cryptanalysis. And one day, maybe I will go back. But my version of success back then was, you know, saving people, right? It's about giving back to my community, using my neurodivergence, my cyber skills to protect our country. And that was really important to me. When my health started failing and the bureaucracy just could not aid me in helping me live both a healthy and successful life,
Mhm.
making that choice was really difficult. I felt like I had peaked at 25. And that's a hard feeling to feel, right? Because you said, okay, well, my success was done, right? Yeah, I met my success. I'm done.
Mm.
And I really had to spend a lot of time thinking about, well, what does the next success look like, right? But
Mm.
luckily, I fell into the SANS Institute where I work now, and I redefined my version of success as being both successful in cyber, but also successful in taking care of myself and making sure that I am advocating for myself. And I've now have the flexibility with a fully remote schedule to cater to both my conditions as well as my work. And I still struggle with it, to be honest. And you're gonna have days where you
Yeah.
struggle with it. I still think about the days that I got to save people and I loved it. But I have to reframe it. And I think now not only am I saving, I mean, I'm helping other people learn and they're gonna help save lives, but I also saved myself. And so remember yourself too, because I think that that's important. I think as business women, we're taught to always think about the bottom line, right? And you think about your family and you think about X, Y, and Z and you get the house done. And granted, I don't have kids. I'm just imagining that's what it's like because
Mhm.
kids are not for me. But um, we don't really take a lot of time for us, right? And when we do, it's about medical appointments. It's about stuff that's sad, right? And so really taking that time to say, no, I'm going to invest in myself really made a difference. And it sounds corny to everybody listening, but once you start doing it habitually, it adds up and you become so much more successful in your career because you are more
Yeah.
confident, you're calm, and you know what you want. So
Mm.
that's kind of where my success has kind of transitioned.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you both so much for sharing your story. I'd love to just quickly share mine, but folks, I want to get you engaged. And, you just heard from Cyndi and Sadie, and I'm going to share how my definition of a success has changed, but I would love for you to think about that as well. It's probably not something, I know it's not something that I'm thinking about every day. Like, okay, what does success, look like? Um, what does it mean? What does success look like for you today? It might be different tomorrow. It might have been yesterday. What does success look like? I'd love for you to just pop it into the chat and, just start to think about that. And
And
I know for
long term versus short term, like you just said,
short,
like
yes,
very
absolutely,
important.
right? Yeah, short term, long term, absolutely. And I know for me, success, I was very defined for many, many years by my work. And that is what I looked at. And since my diagnosis, I mentioned earlier that I have reprioritized my life. And just last week, I posted a LinkedIn post that was really around this notion of how many times I was told, I don't know how you do it all. How do you do it all? This was long before I had a chronic condition, long before I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And what I said in that post was that if I hear that now, that's actually an alarm bell that I'm not doing something right. I do not want to have somebody say, I don't know how you do it all. My priorities, where I used to define myself very much by my success from a work perspective, my number one priority is now my health. And the reason for that is I am not going to be successful in any other part of my life if my health is not good. So it's my health and then my family. And I really struggle to put my health above my, my teenage boys and my husband and my black lab, but I have to, because I'm not good for them unless I am healthy. And then it's my life, and then it's my work. And that does not mean that my work is not incredibly important to me, because it is. I am so passionate about the work that I'm doing, but I actually believe that I am doing the best work, honestly, that I have done perhaps in my life, because I have reprioritized myself and I am taking care of me first. So let's see, just real quick, we've got balance. Yeah, balance, absolutely. So actually, let's use that as a launch pad into the next question that I have for both of you. And if you were watching, and if you weren't watching, I really encourage you to go and watch the video of Lily's building blocks. One of the things that she talked about was boundaries. And you have both mentioned needing to manage a lot, right? Cyndi, you've mentioned having chronic conditions with not only managing your career, but young children. Sadie, you've mentioned having to manage multiple chronic conditions while having a really thriving and flourishing career. So I'd love to hear, especially because, success, two people right away said balance. How do we do that? How do you prioritize and focus on your health while also focusing on your career? And what does that look like for each of you? Sadie, let's start with you first.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that it's always changing. So I think the number one thing is to allow yourself the grace that your version of success, your boundaries are going to shift a little bit, and
Mhm.
that's okay, right? Some days are going to be really hard physically, maybe, and there are some days where you have to break a boundary, right, just to get through the day, and that's okay. So that was a really big thing for me because once, especially with ADHD, right? I set my boundaries, but with ADHD, I bounce all over the place. And so when I see a boundary, I'm like, I don't like it. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I don't know why my brain works that way, but sometimes it just needs to be restructured. So allowing myself to say that's not a failure for going outside of my boundary, but saying I am acknowledging that I went out of the boundary and what is causing that, to kind of recenter and regroup and say, do my boundaries need to change? Right? Because your
Mhm.
boundaries are allowed to change. I think people hate when people say that, right? Because then you're like, oh, it's not really a boundary. But you need to be flexible with yourself. Our conditions are not standard. They don't always fit in a box. Your every day is going to look different. So allow yourself that grace to have different days. And then in terms of boundaries between your health and your work, um, really notice when your work is not doing well, because for me, that correlates directly with I'm not feeling well. So if there are
Mhm.
moments where I'm like, why is nothing working? Why did this code break? What is happening? And people say, Sadie, I think it's something you're doing. I have to take a step back and say, okay, obviously my brain and my body is telling me I'm overworked, something is happening, and I have to recenter and I have to focus on that. You shouldn't have to get to
Yeah.
that point, but knowing your red flags so you can deal with them appropriately is good. And then again, like Cyndi, you have said this whole time, introspection, right? Check in with yourself. I try to check in with myself every couple hours. How am I doing? How am I physically feeling? How am I mentally feeling? And if I'm good to go, keep going. If I'm not,
Mhm.
let's figure it out and try new things.
Yeah.
So allow yourself that grace and really just try to listen to your body and listen to your mind, because you are the only person that knows how you work. As someone with many chronic conditions, there's not a lot of people that have the exact same experience or the exact same conditions, right? So trust yourself and just go with it.
Yeah. And I love how you said that it might change day to day. And I know for me, my boundaries do change day to day. I know, one of my biggest symptoms right now is exhaustion. I happen to be in a place with my RA that my pain is under control, but the exhaustion, sometimes I can anticipate it and other days I can't. But I need to reset boundaries sometimes in the middle of the day because I wake up feeling one way and then, I get to midday and I know, and Sadie, you mentioned like when your work is suffering, it makes you kind of step back and reevaluate and, really trying to figure out how can you build those boundaries, those flexible boundaries into your day-to-day as much as possible. Some days are going to be much easier than others, but I love the introspection and really understanding yourself, having that awareness, and then, taking action based on that. Cyndi, how about you in terms of that balance and prioritization?
Yeah, it's funny because when I first thought of balance, I thought of a 10-pound brick, and then I thought about what 10 pounds of feathers would look like, right? And so sometimes the scale is not always very obvious. It looks like there's a lot on one side, but it's a bunch of those feathers, and then we have that one 10-pound brick. And so I think, balance is different every day. But there's this principle in project management called being agile, right? So it's like when the project is not going where it needs to go, you need to be able to be agile and change the project plan midway through whatever it is. And so I think for me, what that looks like is communication. So with my husband, for example, I am involved in all these initiatives, but it's like being able to have that honest conversation about what needs to get done in order to achieve that balance, in order to ensure that that 10-pound brick, those things that are priorities that are just central to what we have to get done, get addressed. And so then I have what I call my 10 pounds of feathers, which is all of the sort of extracurricular or things that I belong to. And I think that helps me a lot. I don't know if I've ever had that sort of physical support in my life where I can be like, hey, I can't do these things. Can you pick them up? And so to be able to have a partner, it doesn't always look like a partner or spouse. It could be a best friend. It could be a cousin. It could be your parent that's sort of helping you achieve that balance by taking on some of those things from you or ensuring that those core tasks are done. And I think every day it does look different. So like I didn't mention, but I have PCOS, right? So that means that sometimes like I don't know when to predict when certain things happen, but my body will let me know what's happening. And it's like being able to communicate, hey, I don't have the physical bandwidth to be able to complete this day because I have to achieve a 10-hour workday, or I need help with this because these are the two worst days that I'm going through. So I'm physically going to be down. Can you step in? Is really key for me. And so it's building those bridges of communication with whoever those support people are in your life to be able to achieve that balance, even when it does seem like sometimes the feathers are not always great, the 10 pounds of feathers, because you have so many things to do and it just seems overwhelming. But being able to put that off, I think, on another physical resource is helpful. And also outsourcing using technology, being in a technology company, like being able to order groceries on Instacart. I'm just not always ready for a trip to the grocery store, and I could get that done in the middle of my workday, right? Paying bills, having them on auto pay online so that I'm not having to log in. And the other thing is, we talked about self-care, but I schedule my facials out the beginning of the year for the whole year because I get one facial a month and I guarantee that for myself. And because I know I'm not going to remember to do it, I make sure that it's scheduled out for the year so I get that reminder and I can reschedule if needed. So yeah, I think it's just leveraging everything around you to create whatever that balance is, because it's different for everyone. You may see someone and you may be like, wow, she's got it all together. She goes to work, she's got her family life, but there's so many things that we don't see there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my most favorite topics is what do you need to take care of yourself, right? And what does self-care look like to you? And identifying that. And, Cyndi, you gave a perfect example. Using technology. How can you use technology to make your life a little bit easier? Scheduling those facials out. For some people, maybe it's massages, whatever those things are, making sure that those are built into your schedule. That's how you're going to find that balance and or take more steps towards finding that balance and prioritization.
Yeah.
Sadie, did you have a thought?
Yeah, just one last thing is to also, I mean, when we're saying all of these things, I personally keep quotes around for myself because a lot of these things, when we have to pivot, when we have to do all these things, it's depressing. It is sad when you cannot do something as a human being and you have to shift your goals. It's a natural emotion. And I'm not saying you have to be very sad about it, but you do get a little dig in the heart like, oh, I wish I really could have done that today. So if you
Yeah.
just keep quotes, keep like a goal list, keep a best hits list. Keep something around you to remind yourself that the pivot is not the end, right? You are doing amazing things. And just like any
Mhm.
other human, you have to pivot because, Laurie, like you said, like it's all about self-care. And it's hard to self-care in those moments because I know that
Absolutely.
I feel like a failure sometimes when I have to pivot on silly things, right? But then I remind myself, girl, you got this. This is a pivot, right? You need those
Yeah.
reminders. So keep them close by, especially and
Yeah.
practice that, what do they call it? Affirmations, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're okay. This is just a pivot. This is just temporary, not for now.
Yeah, absolutely. And embracing that, right? And Sadie, you mentioned the emotional component, and that's something that I do a lot of work and coaching on that, really embracing all the emotion because it's hard, right? We're managing and navigating a lot, and there's a lot of positive emotion and negative emotion. And I think so often, Cyndi, I'll go back to something that you said earlier. I think so often we're taught to not embrace and talk about the negative emotion or what isn't working. And I encourage just the opposite. Our emotions are there for a reason. Why are we feeling discouraged? Because we have to pivot. Okay, well, maybe it's because, we have to shift on something that was meaningful. Okay, what can I learn from that? We can always learn from our emotions when we allow ourselves to feel them, when we allow ourselves to sit with them and understand what they are trying to teach us, because they're all there for a reason. Don't squash them down. Try to learn from them and embrace them. So I would love to open it up to some questions. I know that we've hit on some questions along the way. I want to go back to something. I'm gonna try to find it. Okay. Ebony talks about being at, okay, she was really recently diagnosed with MS 3 months ago, been at the job 3 years. The previous 2 years was stellar. The last year she's been having issues. Now she knows it was because of MS. She's off work now since being newly diagnosed, but is going back in a month and she needs accommodations. She's feeling nervous about asking for those accommodations. Do either of you have any experiences or any suggestions that you can share with Ebony as she is headed back to work shortly?
Uh, I think Sadie touched on this, but it's really creating that plan. So I think it's working with your provider to really understand what needs to change. And sometimes it helps to have them sign off on it, right? I think that was a first step for me is I always work with my doctor to sort of work with what the next step and can you sign off
Mhm.
on this? So I can take this there, leaving their contact information, in case there's questions about like why would this be needed or things of that nature. But I think when you are informed from the beginning and you come to them up front with like, hey, this is what's changed. I think this is a very normal thing, right? As people age, as they get older, this is not something that's uncommon where they may need these accommodations. So I think working with your provider, doing your own research and really understanding what are those accommodations that you're going to need instead of sort of going into it blindly and thinking, I may need this, I may need that. Really see how you feel or what is going to work best according to what your business role is.
Excellent.
Yes,
Excellent.
I
Using your
definitely
support
agree.
system. Yeah.
Correct.
Sadie.
And support systems like this or support groups will also help you learn, and give you some kind of guidance onto there are, especially with MS, I know that there are laws, there are, accommodation acts, there are certain things that are already in place. So knowing what you are deserved, right? Like, so not saying, oh, can I have this? This is something that needs to be done in order to ensure. So using that language, right? And then the other thing I think is if you've had time and you really, I mean, this is coming from someone who loves her job, right? When there were moments where I couldn't do my job, I was thinking about work, right? Oh, you're always thinking about things, it piques your interest. When you're talking about your accommodations, give that sense of excitement to come back, right? Because sometimes we miss that. Sometimes we are so focused on this is my chronic condition, these are the things that I need, and I'm struggling, and we get focused on that, but to also sprinkle in like, and I've really been thinking about work the entire year. I'm excited to get back to talking to clients. I'm
Mhm.
looking forward to learning this new operating system, right? So give them that nugget of saying, oh, she really wants to be involved. Because again, you want to be seen as an asset. And as much as that sucks, like that we have to kind of play that business game, it makes a huge difference. At least it has for me to be saying I'm not just a chronic illness liability. I am a chronic illness asset to you. Um,
Yeah.
and so bring that to the table, show them.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to come back to a theme that I feel like has been playing out throughout the day. It started in Lily's session, and then we've talked about it and touched on it in many ways. It's owning the narrative, right? And it's shifting that mindset to what is the narrative that you want to share. And I love what you said, Sadie, around, and if I kind of summarize what both of you said, it's working with your doctors, working with your support system, and having a plan. But then also, what does that plan mean? What does that look like? And it's not just about, okay, well, here's everything I need. Here's everything I need to do my best work, to show up in the best way possible, to, support the work that our team is doing, to support the business, right? Again, it comes back to owning the narrative. So one other plug, I know, Sadie, you brought up earlier about, using the Chronic Boss Collective as an opportunity to sort of not only ask these questions, but maybe it's doing some role play, maybe it's gathering some information. I know I also want to highlight that one of the benefits and one of the offerings in the Chronic Boss Collective is the masterminds that Lily hosts every month. And there's actually one in this summit. So whether you're part of the CBC or not, if you have these kinds of questions, bring them to the mastermind later this week, because that's all about using the power of our community to answer questions and get shared experiences. But then also, not only in the summit, but every month, these are offered as part of monthly sessions. All right, ladies, we are tight on time, but I'm gonna give you you're gonna have to condense this into under a minute. All right, are you up for the challenge? What is the last piece of advice that you want to share with this community of folks who are really looking to thrive with these chronic conditions? What's that last word of wisdom that you have? And whoever, Sadie, you unmuted first, you go first.
Um, I think it's surrounding yourself with the right people and practicing until it becomes reality. Practice being confident, practice talking about your story, practice asking for what you need, practice self-care, practice just practice. It's hard. There are days where you don't want to get off the couch, you don't want to do anything, but it's just small amounts of work that add up, and know that you're not alone. So reach out, become a part of the community here. If you don't feel like this community is best for you, there are LinkedIn communities, there are
Mhm.
patient groups. Get involved and talk about it, because your voice deserves to be heard. And I think a lot of that is what this stems from. We don't feel like that we are enough. We don't feel like that we are enough compared to non-chronic people. And you are. You are enough. You bring a lot to the table, and you need to highlight that, because the world is not going to highlight it for you. So shine and show off.
I love it. Shine and show off. All right, Cyndi.
So my final words, I have this saying that I really like in Spanish. It says vivir es luchar, which is to live is to struggle. And I think this is a hot take, but like celebrate your failures as much as you do your wins, because when you're failing, you're learning. And that's really important, I think, because that's an important part of that self introspection that you have to do to learn about what it is that you need to achieve that success, like we talked about earlier. So I think looking at those failures and not thinking of them as failures, but sort of that pivot that we were talking about earlier, like this is the pivot that I have to make. How am I going to get around this? And just ensuring that you always stay authentic to who you are. So I hope you never feel like you have to cover up who it is that you are authentically inside, whether that's neurodivergent or some sort of other physical chronic condition, and always feel really safe in the environment that you are. And if you don't, I hope that one day you become that safe environment for somebody else as well.
Beautiful. And Sadie, my last word is going to be for you that I think you have an Etsy business on your hands, creating t-shirts that say the pivot is not the end. We've got folks that are already ready to buy them. So start to get to work on that new business
I
opportunity.
love that. Hey, that's an ADHD superpower. You throw out words and sometimes they just click. I don't know.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, Lily, I don't want this to end, but I know we're out of time.
I know this was so beautiful. Oh my gosh. And the chat was so vibrant. Thank you all so much for participating so fully. Thank you, Laurie, Sadie, and Cyndi for the sound words of wisdom that you shared. I do think we could seriously go like on and on and on. I can't believe it's the one. Thank you all for being here. A reminder that well, first of all, anyone who was here live, we're going to be raffling off some coaching sessions with Laurie.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So, again, we put that into an email generator. So it's fair, or like an online randomizer generator. So it's all fair. And keep an eye on your email later for that. Also, session recordings will be up later this afternoon, early evening. We just have to wait for them to process. So they will be available for you until October 7th. We encourage you, if you feel like it could be a fit, if you're interested, to join our membership. And I'm going to drop you all get $50 off. And I've included the link here to join. So we hope that you will consider joining us and these amazing ladies. And thank you again. I hope everyone enjoyed day one, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lily. Thanks, everybody.